You are listening to Walking Home from the ICU. We will be exploring how to save and preserve lives in the ICU. All opinions and views shared are unaffiliated with any organization. Now let's step back even more and get a bigger picture. What role does PTSD and cognitive function play in the overall quality of life? Now we distantly know what exactly cognitive function means and what it is really like to be sedated. But how common is it to be damaged from this? 24 to 44% of ICU survivors have depression, anxiety, and/or PTSD, usually a combination of all. Again, we now know that the more patients are sedated in depth and time, the worse their PTSD is. Post-ICU PTSD is likely more related to the alternative realities experienced under sedation. 33% of survivors have cognitive deficits. ARDS survivors have usually been under sedation for longer. Therefore, 70 to 100% of ARDS survivors have severe cognitive deficits at discharge. That only improves to about 46 to 80% at 1 year post-discharge, and then 20% still 5 years after discharge. 71% of sepsis survivors have cognitive impairments 1 year after discharge. What shouldn't surprise us now is that the less a survivor can recall their ICU experience, the more likely they are to have severe cognitive impairment. So what does it look like to take PTSD and cognitive deficits from paper into a life? We don't hear much about this, in part because it is difficult for people to share. I'm grateful to David Burrows, an ICU survivor, for being brave enough to speak about his experience to someone besides his therapist, you. He was willing to face his pain and fears to share this with you. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little about yourself. Where are you from? What was your profession before your ICU stay? A little about your family.
Okay, sure. My name is David Burrows. I currently live in outside of Syracuse, New York. I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware, and moved to Alabama when I was 18 with my parents, and attended Auburn University, where I got BS in soil and plant science and MS in soil chemistry. From there, I worked in a government agency for a short time. I worked in consulting, and let's see, what else? That's about it until I got what I like to call a real job in a corporation, and entered what we'll call corporate America for the majority of my career, about 30 years in corporate. My primary responsibilities in corporate jobs were environmental protection for the company, and health and safety management. And basically what that means is working with our manufacturing sites around the world to make sure they're in compliance with the regulations and corporate standards. So I traveled quite a bit. And I guess that lasted, my most recent job was about 25 years with a major pharmaceutical company. And I can name it, I guess, Bristol Myers Squibb. And that unfortunately came to a screeching halt when I got sick. So, I was out for a year from work, and they filled my position. And then the day I came back, I got laid off. So,
oh, wow.
It was there was a lot of things happened to me at the same time as a result of this illness. And next thing I know, I my first memory after that all was a kind of a blur of my wife walking by the bed, and she says, "Good morning, honey. How are you? It's a beautiful day in Syracuse." And I didn't know where I was. I guess I'd just woken up, and I honestly thought I was in Thailand. And so that was one of my delusions. Was I was all over the world in different places, a lot of which related to where I'd worked in the past, and that's really. There were quite a few things. She said at that point. She said, the boys are going to come see you today. It's going to be a good day. And I thought I was talking. I didn't know I wasn't. Nothing was coming out of my mouth.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's I'm leading up to some observations. I immediately thought I said. Tell Chris not to worry. He can't afford to come to Bangkok. But Alex can come see me because he's okay. He's got a good job and he can afford to fly over here. I still thought I was in Thailand. It was my point of that short discussion. The whole aspect of these the delirium or delusions. They're not dreams. I can relive them on demand and actually start shaking when I talk about them because they were so real. I had dozens of those. I've actually recorded them. I've got a journal. That was one of the treatment methods that was recommended was to create a journal of what happened and the treatment that's been ongoing, frankly, for 2.5 years.
And David, what is so hard or upsetting about those delusions? Though you can now say, I know that they weren't real, what about them makes you shake?
I think even knowing that they weren't real, I know how I felt at the time, and they were real. One of which was terrifying to me. During my career, I worked for 25 years in Puerto Rico, and actually lived there for a while. One of the most, I guess, outstanding or terrifying dreams was I thought I had been kidnapped, and I was in a high rise in Puerto Rico, and I thought that there was a nurse and a doctor in the room. I thought they were trying to kill me. I thought they were talking about, how can we finish them off, And it was just so real. And I right now, pardon me if I start to stutter because I get upset when I talk about it. But it turns out that both the nurse and the doctor were Hispanic.
Oh.
Which kind of, added to the intrigue.
The reality of it.
The reality, and Dr. Garcia, he was Argentinian, I believe, and the nurse actually was from Puerto Rico. So it was just it was so real. The window was open. I could hear kids playing out on the street, and I really thought they were trying to do me in. And it just goes on like that, and many of which were related to my travels, particularly hotels. I found myself thinking I was in hotels in India and Italy, and at one point I was in a trailer, a mobile home in southern Louisiana. I was in a jail in El Paso, Texas. I mean, where did these things come from? I think the TV was on for a good part of the time, and hence another observation is I think the TV had a real important impact on what my mind was telling me was happening.
Wow.
Because I didn't know. Obviously I didn't know, and I probably should have started with this. I'm terrified of hospitals. I always have been, and I had never been in a hospital before.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea where I was, and so it was just one after another of these in my mind trying to make sense of what was really happening to me. And I know in in the mobile home. I remember in Louisiana, I was just so miserable in the bed, and I just I don't think I hurt. I think I was just so uncomfortable I couldn't move, and I'm also claustrophobic, so this whole thing was just a disaster for me. But I remember there was a group of people. They were getting ready to go out. I think they were going out hunting. And one guy stayed behind, and it looked like he was making coffee, just outside of my room. And it was probably, now I know it was a respiratory therapist who was getting ready to do his thing. But I thought he was making coffee. And I remember saying to myself, or saying to him, again, thinking I was talking, please let me go. Just please let me go. I can't do this anymore. Let me go. And I was basically asking, unplug this whole story. I don't like this anymore. And, obviously he didn't, but so that's really a lot of my problems are reliving those events, and it has gotten quite a bit better through therapy.
How long have you been doing therapy for?
Well, I started, about 2 years now. I started about 4 months out of IC, and I started with a neuropsychiatric doctor, and I saw her for about three months, and I honestly didn't think she understood me. With all due respect, she was a great lady, but I was trying to explain, that I had read about this thing called PICS, and I felt like that maybe we should look into that more as far as some sort of treatment methodology, and she just wouldn't pay attention to me. It was like and then nothing would happen. Maybe you should do meditation or something. So it wasn't doing anything for me. And then I ran into a therapist. She's not a doctor, but she's a trauma-informed therapist. And I've been seeing her for 1.5 years now. And, we're doing EMDR, and it seems to be having some positive effect, but it's not overnight. I can promise that.
Right. And I'm going to circle back a little bit back to, you mentioned the discomfort that you were feeling.
Yeah.
You felt uncomfortable, like you knew that you couldn't move.
Yes.
Do you feel like part of that was just because you were stuck in the same position in bed that whole time, and your body, you could still connect enough with your body to feel that?
I think so. I think I just felt really heavy, and I don't know any other way to explain it. Just very heavy, and I couldn't, I couldn't pick up my legs or my feet or my hands or my arms, my head. I was, I use the word cemented to the bed.
Wow. Yeah.
So even if, that's probably the sedation. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. I was trying, and I was wiggling a little bit, to try to move, but apparently I kept slipping down the bed, and the nurses didn't like that. They were actually quite, I think, quite mean to me. I was awake enough to know what was happening, and they would yank me back up in the bed, and I remember it hurt. It hurt my back. When they would, and then maybe they were just pulling me up in the bed, but it seemed to me they were, two of them would come in and yank me back up in the bed and tell me to, stay still, don't move. And that bothered me. I thought, again, as an observation from the event, the bedside manner really is extremely important, I think, to improving the outcome, I guess, or improving the experience.
As a nurse, I experienced how I personally found that it was easy sometimes to become robotic when someone seemed to be asleep, their eyes were closed, and yes, people wiggle and they slide to the bottom of the bed, and you're constantly going up and pulling them up. So I know exactly what you're talking about, but it's interesting to hear how uncomfortable you were. But from the outside, the nurses probably had no idea because you couldn't communicate or express yourself other than wiggling.
That's all I could. I have to say it's in some weird way a pleasure to explain this to a nurse, because I haven't had that chance.
Mm-hmm.
At least directly. I do remember specific instances, and I remember almost the faces of a couple of nurses, because my eyes must have opened a little bit, or at least I was envisioning what they looked like. And this one, she would come into the room and say, "What are you doing, little buddy? You can't do that." And she was not friendly to me, and yanked me back up to bed. And I couldn't. I think the probably one of the nightmares, and I'm actually talking through this in therapy at this point, is thinking I was talking, but obviously nothing was coming out, and no one would listen to me.
And that's part of your trauma.
That's absolutely, yeah. One of the most severe parts is that, as rightly or wrongly, as my therapist put it, it's kind of like being buried alive. You can't, no one will listen.
If you want to join in on the conversation, leave a voicemail at 801-784-0472 or reach out